Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here, this one based on one of your newer suggestions. This was actually placed in one of the comments within one of the videos itself and not a suggestion video. So normally I ask everyone to please do that, at least in the suggestion video. That way it makes it much easier to look through all the dozens and dozens of comments that I get on a daily basis. But this did catch my attention, and when I saw the information on it, especially with regards to a little twist, a very mysterious surprise that occurred later on after the disappearance, I thought it would be a great way to showcase everything in this video here. It's a very fascinating case. Some very notable people, in fact, have been involved with it, and it has to do with this. It's the mystery and disappearance associated with another Ambrose, in this case, a gentleman by the name of Ambrose J. Small. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the info associated with his disappearance, and in a minute you'll hear about that fascinating twist associated with it afterward. So who was Ambrose J. Small? Well, he actually had a much larger name. He went by, his real name was Peter Ambrose Joseph Small, but he went by Ambrose Small, and then the people that knew him, he also went by the nickname Amby. He was someone that was born in Newmarket, Ontario, back on January 11th, 1866. Born to some parents who were pretty young at the time, about 20 years old, and not much is known about his early history that I could see, but otherwise he grew up there within that Ontario area, and by the time he became of a certain age, he was pretty much a self-made millionaire. He was someone that had a whole bunch of holdings in terms of owning a lot of theaters, maybe about 7 or so, and then also having, at least at the time of his disappearance, involvements with 62 other buildings. So at the full height of his career, and again this is in the early 1900s to about the 1919 time period, this was someone that was a self-made millionaire. As always, the quickest way to have any kind of riches pretty much throughout any part of America since its inception is land and owning real estate, and it seems like that's what this guy had. So he had all these dabblings. He was able to create a good amount of profit from it. In fact, by the time we get close to his disappearance, he had already sold a large amount of his theatrical holdings for $1.7 million. That's a lot of money, especially back in 1919. Somewhere along the way, though, in the early 1900s, he also met a woman by the name of Teresa Corman, and she would eventually become his spouse. More on that, though, in a minute, as far as the theories leading up to his disappearance. So, go to, in this case, December 2nd, 1919, there was Ambrose Small within one of his theaters. He was in there with his lawyer, a gentleman with the initials FWM Flock. I guess they were going over business, and they were at one of his buildings called the Grand Opera House, which you're looking at a picture of here. A very beautiful building. This is one of those buildings, no doubt, that has a lot of history associated with it, even to this very day. But what's notable is that his lawyer was actually the very last person to see Mr. Small alive. Unless, if you hear what I'll mention here in a minute, if you believe another story, at least this was the last time that anyone could see Mr. Small alive when it comes to his small flock of nearby people that he knew, like whether they were relatives, whether they were associates, that kind of stuff. So he decided to walk out of the building. No one, though, was able to see or claim afterward that they saw him, let's say, leave his office physically, or that they saw him go into an area nearby called Yonge Street, not even anywhere outside the building itself. In fact, no one even saw anything. For all lack of a better term, they saw him go into the theater on that night, but no one ever saw him really go out of it afterwards. So who knows what occurred between that time period after 5:30 p.m. on December 2nd, 1919. No one has any clue, any information on it. There was, though, a newsstand operator, a guy by the name of Ralph Savian, who stated that he had a small altercation with Mr. Small as he was leaving his office office. But the reason why no one really believes that one, as I was mentioning a minute ago, is because here you have him claiming this, but it was the police that later stated that none of that is true, because he was merely, this guy, Ralph Savian, because of this appearance and the notoriety of it afterward, he mentioned this after the fact, and it seemed like he was just trying to capitalize on some kind of fame from it. But that was it. Mr. Small completely disappeared. No one saw Ambrose afterward. At first, though, it was in a weird way okay, because Amby, again, as that was his nickname as he was known, he was someone that would actually be gone for several weeks at a time. It was his, I guess, notoriety to do that. I don't know if he went traveling some places, maybe just to relax, or if he had, as he was known to be a womanizer, a set of these flings happening back and forth. To give you an idea of the secret nature that this guy, Ambrose Small, had in his office, one of his main offices, he had a secret office there too. And in this office, it had its own secret entrance, its own secret exit. He would use this office to deal with some kind of gambling debts. I don't know if he had the debts themselves or if he was collecting some of the debts from others. Most likely that was the case. But he would also use this office to have all his flings with all the actresses and chorus girls and even some of the employees that worked throughout his theaters. So it goes to show again that when he was presenting one front to everyone out there, he had a secret side as well. So when he went disappearing this go around for several weeks, no one really thought much of it because it was in his nature. Like people were thinking, oh, okay, he'll be back then later on, and then we'll get to see him, and that's that. But he was gone. No one saw him again afterward. It was several weeks, and then it became a good amount of time, and no one was able to see what happened to him. And so finally, his wife and his attorney decided to report to the police that he was missing. And so that's when an investigation was started to try to find out what occurred. Unfortunately, though, there was nothing found. His secret office was perused to try to see, what if there were any leads there, any hints, any evidence. Nothing was found. They even went into one of the other opera houses, and there was a play at the time called Revelations of a Wife. The police investigated that play because they thought maybe Ambrose Small was doing something like leaving cryptic clues, something else within this play to try to give hints in a weird way to the police about what occurred to him. But of course, nothing like that had occurred. They weren't able to find anything for it. And the other local police were involved as well. There was a good investigation, an extensive investigation that went to it. But cut to a few years later, and he was declared legally dead in 1924. So 5 years later, after his disappearance, despite all this investigation, all these parties, everyone else that went out there trying to find out, his case remained officially unsolved, and then it was 100% closed in 1960. His spouse, Teresa Small, eventually was able to obtain all the funds from his, I guess, estate or whatever kind of money he had left over. I'm pretty sure that he would have listed her somewhere with regards to either beneficiary or some kind of other status, but she was able to collect those funds. She, in turn, at least for a little while, became a subject matter when it came to his disappearance. The police there seemed to have repressed or held back any knowledge of this. Like, they considered her not a suspect for a while. And in fact, it's been presumed that some theories, some conspiracies state that the police, especially some of the police departments and one of the chiefs there, ended up doing this on purpose. I don't know exactly why. Somebody might want to point that out in the comments, why that seems to have been done. Was there something else that was happening when it came to the wife and the police? Like, was there some kind of mystery agreement? Who knows? But if the police truly did do that at that time, that remains also a mystery in of itself. The other theory was that she had done this, like, in other words, hired a killer, some kind of thing along those lines, and then that way she was able to collect those funds. But still, there was not much that could be found until, interestingly enough, another twist that I'll talk about in a minute. The first twist, though, was this. 1921, about 2 years after the disappearance of Ambrose Small, there was a mysterious man who had an unmistakable, these are the quotes, unmistakable appearance to this guy, to this missing man. He was found somewhere in Iowa, and he was described as a quote-unquote half-crazed crippled. This was because this was someone that was found to have a gunshot wound in his neck. He had a serious concussion or indications of concussion on his head, and also both his legs were severed from the knee down. But his face, the way he looked, people that saw him swore that this was Ambrose Small. It looked unmistakably like him. Somehow, this mystery man who looked 100% like Ambrose Small was there in Iowa because he was dropped off by another yet mysterious person, an unidentified motorist, who stated that he struck this guy on accident with his car and then left him there badly wounded so that way he could try to get the best medical attention. Wherever this mysterious man dropped off this crippled man, he did so that way he could get the best medical attention, but no one got to know who his name was, nothing along those lines. Whoever this crippled man, this half-crazed cripple as he was described, whenever he was shown a picture of Ambrose Small, he stated that, yes, that is me. But the reason why people didn't go 100% with the notion that that's him, that is actually Ambrose Small, is because, again, he was like a raving lunatic almost. Like he was someone that at first was claiming he was Ambrose Small, and then he was also stating that he was Ambrose Small's former secretary, a guy by the name of John Doty, and so he was switching back and forth between it. But why would he end up there in Iowa? Why wouldn't he not state more information beyond that? All he would say is that he is in this case, Ambrose Small, and then he would claim he would be John Doty, but nothing else afterward as far as how he ended up there, what happened to him, that kind of stuff. So whoever this mysterious man, the surprise twist was that was found back in 1921, he was indeed taken into custody and he was interviewed by the police, but presumably they must have let him go. They didn't have anything else to hold him on, and he was left as is. So who knows where he ended up afterward, but it turned up being a dead end. That a lot of people do point to that being somewhere along the way. It would be the closest theory of being Ambrose Small, if you went by that angle, that was this crippled man. But at least with regards to the investigation, there was a reopening of it in 1936 before, again, it was closed down in 1960. And in it, they actually, interestingly enough, went back to the theory that the wife was involved. This time, they actually considered her a quote-unquote prime mover. So rather than being someone else that was just considered neutral in the death of Ambrose Small, now they consider her almost like a prime suspect. And in it, they stated that Mrs. Small must have hired someone to be able to murder Mr. Small, and then that way she would in turn get the funds. And part of this theory comes from a note, a confession, a letter of confession that was presented to the sister of Mrs. Small. Her name was Florence Small, and in it there was that letter written by a guy named Reuter, and this is what he stated. This was his words: "Poor Ambrose was killed on December 2nd, 1919, and I know that part of his body, the trunk, was buried in the Rosedale Ravine dump, and other parts of the body were burned in the Grand Opera House furnace. You'll be surprised, my dear Florence and Gertrude, to learn that I am more responsible for your brother's death. God forgive me." So this confession, if it's to be believed, pretty much states what some other people were claiming was the true theory at the time, that he was murdered and that he was the wife was involved within it, and then someone else was involved, whoever this mysterious Reuter was, and then that's where his body was actually, ironically, ended up being placed in the Grand Opera House, one of the very own buildings that he had. He ended up being ashes within the furnace itself. So at least that's another theory on there. But those are the two twists associated with the disappearance of Ambrose Small. Here you have one end where he ended up being a mysterious crippled man who didn't know how he got there and what happened to him and his legs and so forth. But there he was somewhere in Iowa and then just went off into wherever, into the ether, and no one else knew what happened afterward. Or he was actually killed on that night, on that fateful night, and then he was dumped, and not only in a ravine, but also burned pretty much within one of the furnaces. And if you want to make it a little more twist, who knows, he may still haunt that location because of what occurred to him. But that's pretty much it. That's all the info associated with the disappearance of Ambrose Small. It was a popular subject to talk about back then and still is to this day. In fact, this is interesting too. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was also someone that was going to be involved in the case. He is, of course, the British author who created Sherlock Holmes, but he had decided not to pursue the case afterward. But he, at one point, was showing some interest, so that's also another interesting aspect. But if anyone has any more info, anything else might have missed, please post those comments below. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.